there's an interesting piece. Heather Cox Richardson wrote this in Salon. And it's essentially, it's the story of how, you know, the Bundy boys ended up taking over Oregon, although there's not any, I don't think that she discusses that. Well, actually she does. Yeah, she does discuss the Bundys. In fact, she opens the article with the Bundys. And it's, at a secondary level, it's really the story about how government works for white people, particularly wealthy white people, but also for white working class people, or at least some, in the United States, and always has, and how it pretty much keeps everybody else out. Government works for the, and how conservatives, which used to be Southern Democrats, Confederates, and then the Southern Democrats through Reconstruction and up until the 1920s, arguably 1930s, certainly with Franklin Roosevelt, how the Southern government, Democrats, and then after that, the Northern Republicans, and now today the Southern Republicans, work to keep it that way. And Heather Cox, in her piece, she goes through this whole, first of all, she starts out quoting Cliven Bundy, who said that he wanted to tell us about the Negro. And Bundy said, and I quote, "Are they better off as slaves picking cotton and having a family life, or are they better off under government subsidy? They didn't get no more freedom. They got less freedom." Right. Now, the Bundys benefit from government programs that kill predators, from drought relief payments. They get a 93% discount on grazing fees, although Cliven Bundy still refuses to pay it. And his son Amon borrowed $500,000 from the federal government through the SBA. So I would say that the government has been subsidizing the Bundys for a long, long time. And yet Cliven, are black people better off under government subsidy? They don't get no more freedom. Right. Anyhow, what Heather Cox Richardson lays out is this formula for how all this went about. And it's really, the essence of it really is the argument about, what is the purpose of government? What do we do with government? And how are the stories told? We have Chuck Schumer a couple of months ago, actually. It was when we were over at the other building, I remember. Chuck Schumer gave a talk down at the National Press Club, as I recall, in which he talked about really kind of making government work again. I was quite astonished by his speech because I thought it was startlingly progressive for a kind of very middle of the road, well, not middle of the road, but a conventional, he's arguably the second or third most powerful Democrat in the nation. Behind Obama and Harry Reid. But Chuck Schumer, here's a couple of things he had to say. Here's clip number one.
The fundamental weakness in the Tea Party machine is the stark difference between what the leaders of the Tea Party elite, plutocrats like the Koch brothers, want, and what the average grassroots Tea Party follower wants. To the plutocrats and their allies, government is indeed the enemy. These people are wealthy, hard right, narrow, people who don't want to pay taxes and don't want government interfering with their companies no matter what damage their companies may do to their workers or to the environment or to anybody else.
So there's this kind of fundamental disconnect. We've got this mythology, which really started back right after the Civil War in large part. In 1865, Southerners, black and white, were starving. Heather Cox Richardson writes, were starving. And so Congress passed a law creating this organization called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. And in the summer of 1865, they were distributing food because people were literally in the United States in the wake of the Civil War starving to death. In 1865, military officers distributed 150,000 rations, a third of them to white people, the balance to African Americans and Native Americans. Southern states, mostly African Americans, Southern states refused to let ex-slaves testify in court, leaving them to the tender mercies of angry white Southerners, she writes, who cheated, beat, raped, and murdered them. So freedmen's bureaus began to hear the cases that pitted black and white Southerners against each other. So this is a federal government agency that's now acting like local courts in southern towns where African Americans have no protection. And 68% of the time they decided in favor of the slaves. So the Southern Democrats, she writes, rewrote history. They had not fought the Civil War after slavery, they said. They fought it to keep the government from forcing its way into their homes, right? The whole 10th Amendment thing. It's all about the states. And Andrew Johnson, who was the Democratic vice president of Republican Abraham Lincoln. And you have to keep in mind, again, back then, you say Democratic, and we're talking racist Southern conservatives. You say Republican, we're talking more progressive and tending toward more in the North. Today, those titles are flipped. But, a federal tax had been put into place during the Civil War. And Andrew Johnson, vetoed expanding that Freedmen's Bureau because it was protecting black people in the South. Johnson was a Democrat. This was one of the big errors of Abraham Lincoln's idea that he could bring people together. Just like Obama thought he could bring people together. He never should have had Andrew Johnson as a vice president. We'll continue the story after this. So anyhow, we get this hate government machine, and the real subtext of it is hate government's ability or willingness to help people of color. This has been a black-white or more accurately a white against everybody else, because it includes Hispanics, Asians, and Latinos, as well as African Americans. And it's basically, a white, wealthy, straight male thing, because it has included women for years and years, and certainly gays and trans people and whatnot. So anyhow, this story, where did this story come from? Heather Cox Richardson, writing for Salon, she says it coincided with the rise of the American cowboy. Now, this was during Reconstruction. This was the 1870s, 1880s. This is right after the Civil War. And she said, cowboys tended to be former Confederates who were dirt poor and good with a horse and a gun. And the Southern Democratic newspaper editors wanted to make heroes out of their hometown boys who had gone out west, right? And so the cowboys, who were the very opposite, according to these editors, the white Southern cowboys out west punching cows, they were the very opposite of the ex-slaves that the government was coddling. Cowboys are the hardworking young men, right? And so the mythology was not just born, but really promoted. Heather writes, the reality, of course, was that the cattle industry depended almost entirely on the American government. The Army protected herds and cattlemen against Indians. Congress funded the railroads that moved cattle to eastern markets, and Indian agents bought cattle to fulfill the ration provisions of treaties. Cattlemen, in short, received massive government subsidies. And by the way, that's true today. You want to talk about welfare recipients? Talk about ranchers. I mean, it's just, so anyhow, by the 1870s, ex-Confederates had taken their support for Western individualism a step further, she says. Their hero was Jesse James, the former Confederate guerrilla turned criminal. They called him an angel of light. He was a good man, the story went, but the government was forcing him into criminality. And then the governor of Missouri cut a deal with Robert Ford to kill Jesse James, and, now you got a government official colluding in the murder of a white Southern guy who has been lionized and mythologized. And the birth of government as a terrible thing begins in the 1870s because government was standing up for the rights of African Americans. And the Southern narrative viewed that as an evil thing. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.